Today, we are going to talk about the film Rashomon from 1950, and this is the first Kurosawa film that I have seen. I will definitely check some out in the future. They're on my list. I recently found the streaming service Canopy, or I'll say that I had used it before. When I was in university, it allowed me to use a subscription for that. But I recently went through my local library, and I was able to get a subscription. I think it's with like a different variety of films every time. And I found a lot of films that I really want to watch in there. So I might choose the next film based on what I have on my watch list in Canopy. I haven't decided 100% right now. But alas, I know that Seven Samurai, I believe Ikaru was also on Canopy. So I'll definitely check those out. But Seven Samurai is like 3 hours long. That's just such a commitment. This one, Rashomon, was about an hour 30. I think it was like an hour 28 or something like that. So yeah, it was Akira Kurosawa. I don't know exactly in his filmography. I know he's made at least a few films before it, so not a debut or anything. But it did feel very low budget. But I read in some of the behind the scenes that it had about a estimated $250,000 budget, and that the financiers were a little ticked off because they were like, "Oh yeah, it's just in a few locations, right? You don't need too many actors." But then they had to build this. They built the whole actual Rashomon building. And then the rain was a huge thing with like fire trucks and like depleting water supply. And they like put some black ink in the water to make it stand out more. And okay, we're getting off topic here. But yeah, those are a few behind the scene tidbits that I found while doing some research. So yeah, like I said, it was about a $250,000 budget estimated at the time. And they had released it in Japan and it was decently popular. And then it went to the US box office. They hoped for more. Even though it was the highest grossing Japanese movie at the time, it made less than $200,000, which was still underwhelming. I guess it just goes to show at the time that market for foreign films wasn't as relevant as it is today. I know that this is just looking into this one movie, but I'm just making that kind of general assumption. Maybe I should do that, but alas. Let's see here. Then I also looked up, I have it written down here, that there was a festival in 2002, the Kurosawa and Mifune Festival, and it made about $500,000 in 2002. So definitely one of those films where when it was initially released, some of the critics were like, yeah, it's all right, but then definitely received so much more praise now, and it's on so many, top 100 lists, gotta watch, must watch. And honestly, my initial opinions are like, a lot of older films, say 1950, maybe even 60 and prior, some of them hold up very, very well. I think this one holds up stylistically and story-wise, but just in general, the overall production. Let me rephrase that. I think that stylistically definitely holds up. I think story-wise, the general thought behind the story and the actual themes and the way it was constructed and what it's supposed to leave with you after was very, very good. But I think that the script, the story, just the general story of what actually happened and the dialogue felt very old, outdated. I'm sure it was great at the time, and I understand why this film is innovative. Sometimes you're like watching a movie and it's like, okay, why is this regarded as so highly as it is? But this one definitely, I understood the innovation with the technical aspects as well as the way that it was telling the story. But yeah, I do think that the story is just clearly outdated. It's about men trying to uphold their masculinity in this situation while they're recounting a rape and a murder. And a lot of the time, the men's motives are just, for power, for lust, and to uphold their self-image. A lot of the times, it's not really a knock on the film that the themes aren't as transmissible to this day and age, but it just, I don't have a desire to watch again. But let's get into the movie. I'm not going to do this for too long, so I'll be pretty quick here. So some of the characters that we have, of course, there's the I'll say there's the three primary characters in the retelling of the story. We have the bandit, the woman, and the samurai as they go by. I know Tojomaru was one of the only names that were really in the movie, I think that they said. I think that's the only name that they said, actually. So he's the bandit. Then you have the woman and the samurai, who are husband and wife. Then you also have characters like the woodcutter and the priest, who start off in the ruins of Rashomon. And then you have the commoner, as it says on IMDb, the man who comes and joins them. Then two other characters that are also relevant are the medium, who translate what the dead samurai, his opinions and his retelling of the story. And on IMDb, there's no credit, but I think the baby deserves a credit in this one. There's no credit for the baby, unfortunately. There was a credit for the policeman, and I don't think, was there a policeman visible on screen at some point? I know there was. Maybe they're talking about in the court when they have. No, a lot of the times there wasn't even a voice. So I don't know why that's on IMDb. Maybe I'm just brain farting and forgetting something, but yeah, so those are the main characters. It's based on two short stories, one in a grove, which I believe is the primary source, and a lot of the story takes inspiration for that, and then Rashomon. And that short story, I believe, was kind of just had the context of the actual Rashomon building and like the raininess and maybe a few of those characters. I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me on that, but I believe Kurosawa melded those two stories together, mainly taking inspiration from In a Grove and the themes from that. So, talking about the characters, I'll just dive right into the story. Spoilers if you haven't seen it. Most of these I do spoilers. I should get in the habit of saying spoiler warning more, though. I really should. But let's first talk about the bandit and his interpretation of the story, because at the beginning we have these two men, the woodcutter and the, what's his name? The priest, woodcutter and the priest, in the ruins of Rashomon. It's super rainy, setting the mood, and then they're talking about this absolutely horrible story that just happened the other day. It's shaken them to their core, especially the priest. And so, first of all, we have the story from the bandit, Tojomaru, sorry. So, he first tells the story, and this is our first encounter with the story, is that he was taking a nap in the forest, and he saw passing by the husband and wife, and he told the samurai, the husband, that he had found a stash of ancient swords and weapons just over this hill. Come follow me. And so they go and follow. And then after that, he captured him. He tied him up. He went back, found the wife, and he seduced the wife. And he raped the wife. And in the story, he begins coming on to her. And then it seems like that she kind of like, her hand on the back kind of started like giving into it, and it could tie into her trying to, I think in that story, I feel like this is a problem because I'm just going to take tidbits of another story and try to place it in one of the other stories. And that's kind of like the dialogue that this film has, where it's like you can't really trust one story because of all the different details. And I believe this was the one where this was one of the couple where she says to the bandit, like, okay, I'll leave the samurai. You actually help me get out of this and let's go. But it also could just be a trick for her. But nonetheless, yeah, he raped her. And then after that, the wife, she told them they had to duel to the death. And the bandit, he nobly agreed because this is the bandit story. And he nobly untied the samurai, and they had a very good battle. I think they said, oh, we clashed swords 23 times. Nobody has ever clashed swords with me more than 20 times. And he won in an epic battle of masculinity, and he's the man. So, of course, his story is all about upholding, well, everybody's story is all about upholding their own image of themselves. His very much with his masculinity and nobleness. He's not going to take any cheap shots. And again, that's kind of accentuated when he says that, he fell off his horse later because he was sick. So, he had a stomach flu when he was caught. And he wasn't actually just by his own will. It's something that he couldn't control, right? He would never get caught by his own will. So we had that first story. First of all, just talking about I'll kind of like touch on each character when each of their stories come up. So the bandit, I really loved his laugh. It's very primal. It's very much kind of like a wild animal. He felt like he was full of energy, and he was the one who kind of, his clothing also just kind of showed that he was more, primal, kind of like wild animal. He was one with the forest. And so what was I going to say? I was going to say that This actor, I believe, he was in many of Kurosawa's films. I just looked through his IMDb really quick, and he seems like a Kurosawa legend. I believe he was in Seven Samurai and a few others, so that's awesome. He's very charismatic, and I was talking to my friend at work about this film, and he's like, yeah, that guy, he's kind of just a bit silly at times, but like his laugh was like, if somebody's like actually just attacking you and he has that laugh, that's super scary. But I really liked him. I thought the laugh was absolutely hysterical, personally. Then you have the woman's story about how she was raped, and then the bandit just left right after that. And then this was an interesting scene where it was just her left with her husband, who was tied up, and the husband just gave her a cold glare. And it was this very long shot of the camera behind the husband, kind of just dollying a bit to see the woman, make sure that she was in frame the entire time. And she was like going crazy because she's like, don't look at me like that. Like literally kill me instead of looking like that. This is the worst thing in the entire world. And he just keeps staring. And the shots cutting to him are kind of funny. He's just sitting there like blank-faced expression. But there was just something about that scene that it is such like a, I don't want to say unrealistic, but just such a unfathomable. It's just out of context. People wouldn't normally act like that nowadays. And I think that difference in that scene and her going crazy and just the framing of us behind the samurai the entire time, looking at her breaking down this entire time. There was just something about that scene that was like, I was very captured in that moment for some reason. And yeah, sometimes it's just, you don't know why, but it just worked. And then in that scene, you have her freeing him and begging him to kill her. I believe she said, oh, because I have been with two men, it's something I can't bear and you have to kill me. Something like that. And then at that moment, because of the cold glare that this man is giving her, she faints. And while she was holding the dagger, because she was trying to kill herself, she accidentally kills him. And then she tries to kill herself unsuccessfully. And there we have that. And so her story, she's trying to uphold her story is the most confusing to me. Because this story is definitely about masculinity and everybody about their own reputation. And because these gender roles back then were so different, her story felt very much like she was trying to uphold her saying that she was actually actively trying to kill herself in that moment, was trying to uphold, oh no, I'm actually a good wife to this man, and because I did this bad deed, I want to make it up to him. That's what it seemed like. And so that could be her reason for twisting the story in her ways. Because yeah, each interpretation, they're trying to uphold some sort of self-image in that culture, in that time period, which is one of the reasons why it's less transmissible today. But the way the story's told, and if we're thinking about how things were back then yeah, it makes sense. Her story was interesting, and again, that glare was just such a weird shot that I really loved. Let's move on to the samurai story. And in the samurai story, which again, these were two back-to-back, like at the beginning of the movie, they told the story, okay, we have the one version of the story. Then these two are just very interesting, and they kind of like got the movie going a bit more, because after the one retelling, it's like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, but these two were very distinct and they have their moments. And so in the samurai story, it's told through a medium, which was super fun. The voice was super weird through this woman medium talking to the dead samurai and telling his story. She was just super cool. Her physicality in those scenes were awesome. And yeah, I think everybody agrees that was just, it was a great way to tell this story and kind of added a more mystical element to it, which was fun. So after the rape in that story, the bandit asked the woman to travel with him and say, okay, you're going to come with me, please, please. And then she said, okay, but you have to kill my husband first. And then the bandit, instead of actually killing the husband, he turns on the woman and kind of sides with the husband at this point and says, okay, well, if you're going to act like that and be so unloyal to your husband and just not go off with me in the first place, then you are worth nothing to me anymore. The samurai gets a choice. Do you want to let her go, or do you want me to kill her? And the samurai, I don't think he says exactly what. He definitely disses the wife like quite a bit there. And then she runs away, and then he goes and chases her. I believe he's still tied up at that moment. And then I feel like, was there like a title card that said a few hours later? But it said like, we know that some time has passed. He comes back and he sets him free. And then there's no epic duel in this one. In the samurai story, he is the one who goes out on his own terms, and he kills himself with the dagger because his wife had been unfaithful to him. And that is like him upholding his image of he went out on his own terms. He didn't go out like a coward. That's kind of him trying to uphold that. And then he says, kind of just adding to the, trying to make the story seem more realistic, that, oh, later somebody came and removed the dagger. And it's like, oh, okay, how do you know this? But okay, sure. So in this one, it's very much through a medium, adding another like layer that the story had to go through. That could be so many things could have been twisted there. So, and that note at the end was kind of a cherry on top of that. And the last story that we get into is the woodcutter story, the guy who was at the Rashomon building. And he said that, no, there's another perspective, my perspective. So he's saying that he was an onlooker of the whole thing. And because he's an onlooker, the audience is led to believe that his is probably the least biased story. But then we learned at the end that his story was not free of bias, as no story is. So in this story, the bandit begged the wife to go with him. And he was saying, oh, I'm either going to kill you or you can go with me. Please, please go with me. And then eventually she managed to free her husband, free the samurai. And after the samurai being freed, he didn't want to fight the bandit, even though that's kind of what they were supposed to do. But then in this scene, you think that she's just on the ground crying, and then she turns her head up and she's laughing. And she's saying, both of them, oh, you guys aren't real men. You guys aren't willing to fight for a woman. And she kind of just goaded them into fighting each other. And it was a fun telling of the story because like the fighting was they were super shaky the entire time. It was a horrible fight. And then they were both cowards the entire time. And even when they were actually clashing swords, the woman at the sideline, she was also like covering her face, screaming the entire time. And so I feel like in this story, if we're trying to like interpret the story ourselves, that probably in the past, this is like a message of the movie. Like in the past, we don't know what history is actually accurate. There's no way to 100% certainly tell. People are scared of violence, and that's no mystery. And so the fact that this fight was super, super sloppy can make the audience think, okay, after all these more noble retelling of the stories, this feels more realistic. But again, we can't know 100% what happens. And it ends in the samurai killing the husband, which happened in the samurai story as well. And then at the end, the commenter pokes holes in his story saying, but what happened to the dagger? And he kind of accuses him of taking the dagger, which is his one flaw in his story. But because there is that one flaw, we're still led to believe. What else could he have compensated for? And what are his motives? Why would he change up the story? And after all these stories are told, the priest says, I've lost faith in humanity. I've lost faith in everybody. Everyone's lying, deceiving. But a baby comes along. There's just a crying baby that they hadn't noticed up until this point. Maybe the rain, was pretty loud. They find this baby, and the woodcutter nobly says, I have 6 others, I'll take it. Then the rain stops, the sun starts to come out, and his faith in humanity is restored. It feels very like folktale-y, where everything's very concise, has these broad messages, but some of the things that happen aren't very realistic, like a baby's just chilling there. Okay. But it feels very folk story-y. But that's the end of the movie. And honestly, I did enjoy it. Again, like I said before, I don't think it holds up the best. I think that if we're talking about some of the themes of the movie, doing some research, the term Rashomon effect comes from this film. It's a situation where I think, there's 4 different stories. You have no clue which story is the truth. There's so much contradicting information within all the stories. And this story was trying to tell that so much of history and so much of the news, I guess it kind of leads into the fake news. Maybe it's more contemporary than I thought. That everyone is going to try to change stories to make... They're going to try to uphold their self-image. Maybe not just in stories, but in like anything that they're doing. And that you can never really trust any one given source. And the theme that it's bringing out is the theme of the unreliable eyewitness. And it's very transferable to stories, these themes, whereas you can have the perspectives, whoever's telling the story, if it's in first person or it's in third person, you always think of the unreliable narrator and leads that into question. And movies that actually implement the unreliable narrator are very interesting, like just any story in general that does that. And then in the real life, of course, you have eyewitnesses that go to court and they're probably going to try to swindle things to be more in their favor. And it's just saying a lot about human nature, and that's why the story, whereas some of the dialogue and just like the things happening on screen can be a little outdated, but the story and the thinking behind it in the end is what makes the script like super solid. I think that everyone can relate to this theme of twisting things to be in their favor. I've definitely done it. Like in recent memory, sometimes I'll like send a text and there's definitely like an intention that I want to get across and I want to be very plain about it. But there's just like slight things that maybe I'll alter just to make myself seem like, okay, I'm making myself seem very much like I change a lot of things, but it's like not necessarily not telling the truth, but just slightly wording it to kind of be in my favor. And then I look back on it sometimes and I'm like, why did I say something like that? I can't think of a recent time when I've done that, but I remember in high school, I've definitely done that before. And I'm like, everyone's done it. I'm sure it's a thing. It's hard to like give specific examples because it's like one of those things. I know I've definitely done it in the past. Everybody probably has. Everyone can probably relate to that. And yeah, it just says a lot about human nature, and it's cool when there's such a broad theme in this movie that everyone can relate to, which is, yeah. And that's probably one of the reasons why the story was so well regarded. That, as well as just the technical elements. Again, the shooting style was great. I loved all of the swift movies. There's just one shot of, I think it's just the woodcutter walking through the forest. There's a bunch of shots at the beginning, which kind of did go on a bit long, but there's one shot where he's walking. The camera starts on like the left side of him. It like pans in front of him, and then he keeps walking. We see so much of the forest, and I don't know. It's just, I don't know the exact shot, but there's just a million great shots in this movie. I just love movies based in natural settings. I'm a sucker for that. In this movie, I think that in the forest, it felt low budget. It did. But what they did with it was great. And I think the courtroom setting was very, very well shot. I loved how that the audience is the judge in this situation, which makes a lot of sense. The audience is listening to all of these stories and interpreting them, trying to figure out who's telling the truth and who isn't. We're literally putting them on trial. And yeah, that framing and the courtroom just look of it is incredible. I really like that. I like how the two guys are just in the background the whole time, just chilling. And yeah, technically, of course, this movie's great. It's Kurosawa. This is the first Kurosawa I've seen, but of course, that's what everybody says. They're just technically great. The stories are very great, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. It was nominated for Best Art Direction and Set Direction for a black and white film in 1953, but the movie came out in 1950. And so I don't know how the Oscars went back then, but yeah, it's weird because in 1951, it was voted on that it received like a special honorary award for foreign film because foreign film wasn't exactly a category at that point. So it got an honorary award in 1951, but then it was nominated in 53 for set direction and art direction. Maybe my research is just wonky, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And yeah, it's weird how that went, but yeah. A few other things I just want to say was some of the themes of like, people were saying, some of like the IMDb trivia was like, they used mirrors to reflect a lot of the light in the forest because of the limited technology that they had, and that their shooting the sun between the leaves was like a revolutionary technique that hadn't been done very much up until that point. So yeah, I think that going along with those themes of the forest being a mythical place blocked to the sky, and so that's the sun was struggling to go into the forest, so it leads to like God can't see exactly what's going on in the forest, so much misdeeds can happen and misinterpretations, which goes along with the themes of everybody lying and everything, which is cool. I like that. Going into the forest is like you're losing yourself in the forest, not just physically but also mentally, if that makes any sense. So the forest location was just great for that. It's like, yeah, it's the forest. It's more, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Just free. There's a word that is just escaping my mind, so I'm going to move on. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about kind of the cultural context at the point. So it is post-World War II. And I've read a few Letterboxd reviews and just a few articles, and it seems to, some people are saying that it's kind of loosely based off of post-war Japan, where you have this rundown building and people have lost their faith in humanity after this war. They've seen so many brutal things happen, so much needless violence, that so much ego going into that war, and that they lost their faith in humanity. And so the devastating effects are represented in that building, as well as this story that is being told, saying that there's so many contradicting accounts of this, again, just this brutal, we're talking about the contradictory nature of the film, but the actual story is just brutal. It's literally a guy raping and killing a guy. So that just leads into those themes of, yeah, the brutality of the war and everything, and how historically we talk about these wars so much and these historical events. But again, 100%, we can't exactly tell what happened there, because history is told by the victors, as people say, and so much could be incorrect or just like fudged a little. And then also, what was I going to say? Oh, I had something to say and it completely slipped my mind. Oh yes, yeah, the ending where you, of course, it's a happy ending after this brutal act, but the priest, his faith is restored in humanity, the rain stops, and the sun comes out, and that's just kind of, feels like it's saying to Japan, like, even though these brutal things happen, we have to move forward, and the right thing to do is to help other people and try to be honest. It's just like, yeah, positive message at the end, makes sense, and it's a very concise story. It's very allegorical, and it feels very folktale-y, as in the message is very clear, and it's a cool, innovative way that they told the story. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I really did like the movie. Again, like I said, I don't think it held up 100%, just based on not the story in general, just like the dialogue and the actions on screen. Yeah, they definitely feel dated, which can turn a few people off, but in general, it's a great story. I think I gave it 3.5 on Letterboxd. I always say it's just a Letterboxd review. I really did enjoy thinking about this movie. So, yeah, I don't see myself seeing it again in the near future, but I really did like it. Kurosawa, my first Kurosawa. Looking forward to see more. It was a great movie, and yeah, definitely recommend checking it out. Hope you enjoyed this talk about it. For next week, I'm just gonna choose a movie real quick. I haven't actually decided. So I was saying at the beginning that I was gonna choose one from Canopy. And so here, let me just show my watch list real quick. Let me adjust the framing a little. Oh gosh, this framing isn't very good. Okay. So here's my watch list. Some of the things I have on here. And I think I was leaning towards Days of Heaven or A Simple Plan. Wheel of Fortune to Fantasy is also an interesting one, because it was the guy who made Drive My Car the same year he made this movie, which was just less notable, or less people knew about. Seven Samurai, of course. And you can't really see it on screen, but there's also things like Inherent Vice at the edge there. Art of Self-Defense, Existenz. Ooh, Shoplifters. Shoplifters. I definitely wanted to watch that too. Boyhood. Okay, I think I want to do A Simple Plan. Because, yeah, it's a thriller. It's a classic, apparently. I've heard so much about it, but I really don't know much about the story. So, yeah, I'm choosing A Simple Plan for next week. And next week is May the 9th, so May the 9th, 7 p.m., be here when we talk about A Simple Plan, my favorite Canadian band.